welcome to New York, Lucas. Is it a city that you visited frequently and know pretty well?
I have visited it, yeah, a couple of times in my life. I remember the first time I came here with my father for the Christmas break. And so the first image I had of New York was one, over the holidays. And then I think over the years, I have gotten to come to know it much better. It's not that I visit regularly, but I've been a couple of times.
And it's very different to the environment that you grew up in, which I believe is fairly similar to the opening of the film, the beautiful images that we see of Leo and Remy running through the fields of flowers, because you actually grew up next to a flower farm. Is that right?
Well, I would say close to a flower farm, not next to a flower farm, but in the environment of, yes, I grew up on the Flemish countryside. And I think when we were writing this film and when we realized it would be told through the prism of a young friendship, the very first image that came to mind for me was this image of the boys running in between the dahlias. I think unconsciously because I had captured it from my young years. You know, I remember running through nature with my friends. And then I think as we started to dissect it, I think it became this image to represent childhood and to represent, innocence and to represent the fragility of life as well, which is, I think, at the core of this film. So nature, I think, takes a very important position throughout this piece because we follow the flower fields through the seasons and how I guess how the impact of nature impacts the characters.
Yeah. And I love the connection that we see, that bond that we see between the two boys. And quite a lot of it is just sort of expressed in their eyes and in how physically kind of intimate they are with one another. And I don't know, for me, I could have definitely watched an entire film just of the two of them in each other's presence, not even sort of speaking their bike rides, and it's really beautiful. I just wondered how intentional it was to sort of give the audience that feeling that they could just, want that part of the film to kind of last forever.
Well, I think that is the point, right? I think that is, I think we all long for those days, those moments in our lives where we all ran freely, where love didn't have to have a name, where connection was still sensed so strongly. And I think when we were working on the dramaturgy of the film, we always realized everyone would want to stay in the first 15 minutes and that it would never last long enough. And that is, of course, life. But it's also, I think, important for what we want to speak of throughout this piece. I think this piece is so much about the confrontation with a brutality that seeps in when these young men understand in this world that their intimacy and their tenderness is looked upon as something not to be valued in their universe. And the flowers get cut from the fields. And so I think it is a film about the transition from the Garden of Eden to puberty.
Yeah, I love the symbolism in the film and how you could just read it quite metaphorically, and yet there's a real naturalism to it and almost sort of a documentary feel in the way that you observe your characters. And that's a beautiful marriage, I guess an intentional marriage of those two kind of forms in a way, approaches.
Yeah, it is. I went to a film school that combined documentary and fiction, although when I started at 18, I really knew I wanted to make fiction. I'm very convinced. And yet I chose that school. So something inside of me must have been interested. And I remember a teacher of us showing Grey Gardens, which which is a documentary that really marks me, because I was like, wow, reality is crazier than fiction. And I think I learned so much through making documentary, so much in the way I want to approach actors. I think my main work with actors is trying to look for sort of authentic plays that I know through them the audience will be transported into something felt. I mean, that it will create this sort of emotion that needs to be authentic for me in order to reach an audience. Yet at the same time, I think in the visual style and in the approach in writing, we very much work with color and light and expressionism and something very styled to remind us that this is fiction. So there is, I mean, marriage is a great word. I do see this being a marriage between the two. And I think we live in a moment where, and maybe, I mean, where the fluid line between there just becomes even more fluid, I feel. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And so the two boys, when they start, I guess we call it middle school here in the US, they're like 13. That's when you know, the closeness between them is kind of questioned by the other kids around them. And, you know, the girls ask, are you a couple? And they seem like to not be too sort of aggressive in asking that. Maybe it would be okay, I don't know. And then Leo gets called a sort of derogatory name. And so we sort of see that creeping in. And although the kids around them are kind of reading it, that these kids, the boys might be gay, it's not necessarily about sexuality, but more about masculinity, isn't it, really? Because even if these were two, you know, as they, and it also sort of, we're conditioned, I think, as audience members to sort of question that too, like, oh, why are they so close, you know? So that's interesting. But yes, could you maybe you could find a question in me talking about that? Yeah. And obviously you're coming to it as a queer filmmaker with your own experiences, and I know that that's partly come into the film too.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think this is a film about how we as a society are so conditioned to look at male intimacy immediately through the lens of sexuality, and I think how we murder, in a way, the beautiful friendships between boys from early on, because what we value in this masculine universe that is so much about dominance and competitivity and being stoic with emotions, we value somehow we value loneliness more than connection. And I really wanted to show, first of all, that very tender, intimate connection between these boys, and also then show the loss of it, because I think it's an incredibly violent thing. I mean, of course, I myself grew up queer, and I remember that moment in time when I was young and wanted to belong to many rather than to myself, and started to become fearful of the intimate, and therefore pushed away boys because I got scared. So this film starts from that place of regret that I feel for the love I deprived myself of, and for the things I broke when I didn't know the impact of the breaking yet. But I think as an adult, I realized that is an experience, that is a human experience. It is not only a queer one. It's one that many boys, straight, queer, bi, whatever, have felt. And it's what many people have been through in friendships, because it's just, it's just what happens when we're young, and when we find out so much about ourselves and the world at the same time.
Yeah. And it's something that's, I think, rarely spoken about or articulated. So it's that's one reason why I think people have responded to this film so beautifully, is because it articulates something that, you know, is rarely even acknowledged, I think. And your two young leads, we have to just speak about them. I know you had quite a long pre-production period of, was it around 6 months of working with them?
Yes.
Which is pretty incredible. What was sort of the most valuable thing, would you say, that you got out of that period before you started shooting?
I think the most valuable thing is that you really get to know each other profoundly. And I think directing, when people ask me, is directing adults different as directing kids? I often say it's not about whether they're an adult or a kid, it's just more about their personality. I think you direct everyone in a different way because people need different things. And as I get to know them profoundly, I know what it is they need. But I think the most important part, what happens in those months, is I introduce a camera very early on to them, because I want to arrive at this point where the camera is no longer an intruder, but it becomes a companion. Someone or an object they allow to see their vulnerability and their emotion, which is not that easy. I mean, it's whether for adults, for kids, it's difficult being so vulnerable in when something is filming you. And I think this is one of the very important elements, while at the same time spending time and really coming to understand each other better, and having a true sense of who they are, and creating, I guess, a sort of team in which collaboration seems the keystone for what we were about to make.
Yeah, because you were even open for them to having, you know, suggestions of their own dialogue, weren't you, I think?
Yeah, because, you know, I think I'm not 13 anymore, so they are 13 right now, and I think I knew that, and I think it's an important value to use. They only read the script once in the very beginning, and then it was important for me that they read it, because that it was transparent, and that they knew everything that was about to happen in this film. And we had a very great conversation about its themes, you know, about friendship and heartbreak in friendship, and loss. And I think, you know, we can learn a lot by listening to this age, because they are still so closely connected to the heart. Mm-hmm. And they say things in a sort of pure, radical way, which I think is incredibly inspiring. So we had this open conversation, and from that conversation, I think many ideas came, and many possibilities, and many other options. And I think I was very open to that, and very intrigued by what they would add as the 13-year-olds that they are to the script and to the lines. And I think they added a lot.
Yeah. Well, since the film premiered and got the Grand Prix, you've been talking about the film for a long time, and now it's building to this beautiful crescendo of having been nominated as Best International Feature Film at the Oscars, which I think is a pretty amazing category, isn't it? Because it's just 5 films that make it from all of the countries that submit films. So
yeah,
I guess what you're still sort of in the midst of it, but what does that sort of mean to you to be one of those 5 films with Close?
I mean, we're incredibly honored, and you know, being celebrated to that extent is not something to take lightly. It's an enormous privilege, and I feel incredibly happy to go through this and be on this journey with someone who's nearly 15. I have to say nearly 15, otherwise he'll get angry. I can't say 14. Nearly 15 and 16. And it just reminds me of the absurdity somehow of it, and really reminds me to live in the moment and go through the moments rather than only be focused on the destination. And You know, I know I want to make film since I was very young and have been dreaming about the Oscars when I was young. I mean, even if those dreams changed as an adult, there's nothing as powerful as reliving somehow those childhood, those childhood desires. And so I feel like a young version of me is just jumping down up the bed and like going crazy, and I feel that, and so I'm yeah, like I said, I feel very, very lucky to be here.
Well, as well as your films looking beautiful, you are always very stylishly dressed. I've noticed in lots of interviews and your appearances for the film. So, have you got your outfit planned for the Oscars?
Yes, I have. I'm gonna keep this, of course, in a surprise. The only thing I can say is that it will be designed by someone who comes from our country.
Nice. Yeah. So I've got one last question for you, and it's for your favorite piece of LGBTQ plus culture. So it could be a book, film, TV series, artwork, photography, dance, opera, any piece of culture, or a person who identifies as LGBTQ plus. So someone or something that's had an impact on you and resonated with you over the years, and why.
Oh my God. Oh, wow. I mean, there are so many. There are so many. But I think one of the filmmakers who really inspires me a lot and makes me want to do better and makes me want to challenge myself and deconstruct the language and find those codes and is fellow Belgian filmmaker Chantal Akerman. She is someone who I think showed me the way and has been incredibly important for my work, and someone who I deeply admire. And I think and I could only name one, so that's a pity, but I'm gonna put Celine Sciamma in there as well. She's also someone who I truly deeply admire. And then I've also been incredibly inspired by Hunter Schafer in this series called Euphoria. I think that acting performance is just extraordinary. And yeah, I mean, you know, it's what it's my cup of tea. You know, I read queer books, queer content. I'm so inspired by the queer community and by everything that they put into this world. And so it's yeah, it's an inspiring place.
Can I ask you for a book? Is there a book that you're currently reading that you recommend, or one you've written
I mean, one of
recently?
my favorite books is, of course, Giovanni's Room. I actually am reading right now, and it's a book that's gonna come out in, I think, in 2 weeks. I'm reading In Memoriam by Alice Wynne, which is a new book with a queer love story at the center, set during World War I, which is, I mean, I've only read 20 pages, but it's already completely mesmerizing. And then I just recently also read Swimming in the Dark.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you read it, but I think it's extraordinary. Don't you?
Yes, beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. So Giovanni's Room, Swimming in the Dark, and then In Memoriam by Alice Wynne.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to get all these recommendations from you, Lucas. Well, Lucas Dont, thanks so much, and all the best for the Oscars, and congratulations on your beautiful film.
Thank you so much. Thank you.